I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 124. Today on the show, we're joined by John Jeanenney, and we're diving deep into the topic of blood tracking and recovering a hit whitetail. Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And today in the show, we are diving very deep into the process of properly blood trailing and tracking a hit deer. And surprisingly, this is something we've never really talked about a whole lot on the show to this point. And it's a big, mistake on my part, I suppose, because this is such an important topic. I mean, we do all this work to put ourselves into a position to get a shot at a deer, but then once we do, well, the work usually is not nearly over. Being smart about how we track and trail those deer after the shot, it's so important, and in a lot of cases, it's a significant challenge. So today, we are bringing on one of the absolute foremost experts on this topic, John Jeanenney. And John is the author of 2 books on this topic. He's a renowned breeder and handler of tracking dogs. He's been on over 1,000 tracking jobs, and he was inducted into the 2012, he was inducted into the New York State Outdoorsman Hall of Fame. So, quite simply, we are in for a serious treat today. But before we get to the main event, we've got a little sideshow for you as usual. My co-host,
That's exactly what it is. Right next to the bearded woman.
Yeah, this is the mini circus that's going to happen here for a second. Me and Dan do have a few updates for you. So if you'll bear with us, Dan, what's going on?
Let me count how many times I've hunted since the last time we talked. Oh, that's right, 0.
Oh.
I have been in the stand 0 times since the last podcast, since last Saturday night. So I'm not talking about this past Saturday. I'm talking about 2 Saturdays ago. So it's been not what I kind of was hoping for.
So now I have some assumptions, but I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. Why haven't you been hunting?
All right, so let's see here. Obviously, work. Obviously, kids, right? But my wife had to do something. She every year, it's different times of the year. She does this thing where she goes to something called a mommy market, and she sells all the kids' used clothes and some of her goods that she makes, and tries to hack it. This time it happened on Saturday, this last Saturday, and then I had some family stuff I had to do with my stepmom's burial, and then I had a wedding on Sunday night. So it was, and then that brings us to right here, because I didn't hunt Sunday. I wasn't able to hunt Sunday night. I wasn't able to hunt last night. And here we are talking about hunting, and I haven't hunted.
You sound so glum right now.
I'm kind of glum, man.
You sound really glum.
I missed a pretty decent cold front come through.
I
know. A lot of those guys are talking about the October lull that's supposedly going on right now. I got a trail camera that is on that food plot that I planted, and the deer are on it every day. Now, there's even during daylight. So there's not necessarily any mature buck sightings yet, -1. There's been a 3-year-old that's been visiting it, but there's been daylight deer movement, and that's a positive. So
yeah. What's the next hunt on the horizon? Do you have? I mean, there's another cold front pushing through in the next few days. Are you going to be able to catch that one?
Yeah, Friday this weekend for sure. I'm going to be able to hunt. Friday night we got a southwest wind. I'm kind of debating on 2 different stand locations. One is going to be a run and gun. Actually, it's going to be a run and gun on public property.
Nice.
The other one that borders a property that I can hunt. And then the other one is going to be going down to my main farm and trying to connect with some of the deer that I saw. I put a trail camera on this fence line by where all these deer were piling out the previous weekend. So like 2 weekends ago on that Friday night where I said I saw that shooter, but he was down the fence line.
Right.
Try to connect with that and kind of see what's going on there. And, just try to get back into the swing of things, check some trail cameras, see where the signs kind of popping up, and, play it by ear. Hopefully I'll be able to hunt a couple times throughout next week as well, and really start trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
Nice. Well, if you had to miss some time to hunt, this past week and a half was probably not the worst time to do it, as we're, it's hopefully just going to be ramping up and getting better from here.
Right.
I did have a few kind of exciting hunts since we last chatted.
I know I saw some trail cam pictures, man. Looks like Michigan's not the small buck state anymore.
Well, it's not the big buck state either, but it's decent.
The medium buck state.
The medium buck state, yeah. I can't remember if last time we chatted if I had seen Holyfield yet or not, but Tuesday night, I think we recorded last Tuesday.
Yep.
So that evening, after we got done recording, I checked out this little spot where I can see Holyfield from the road sometimes, and lo and behold, right, last light, bam, there he was. And so I saw him, but he was there's this little patch of cover that I told you about that he sometimes beds in, and he just popped out of that piece of cover, and it's in, easy sight from the road. You can see this cover. It's not that far from the road, but he beds in this little patch up close. It's kind of weird. And I saw him, and this is like right at the end of being able to see with my binoculars, and he walks out in front of my food plot, and I've got that screen of cover around it, that sorghum and Egyptian wheat, and he walked on the outside of that. So not in my food plot, not where I would be able to see him if I was hunting, but on the outside of it, and paralleled it all the way around to the outside for maybe 50, 60 yards, and then he actually started bumping a doe, and then he disappeared. It got too dark. That's all I saw.
Nice.
Well, fast forward a couple days, and as we talked about last time, my plan was to stay off this farm, not hunt it until later in the year, so I was sticking with that. We had a little bit of a cold front hit, like you said last week, so I've got a couple different properties I'm hunting this year that are new, so I headed to one of those Thursday evening and did a run and gun set, and I screwed up. I had looked at the maps. I'd never hunted here before, but I looked at the maps and I saw, all right, this big block of timber, there's a swamp over here, and there's an intersection of a standing bean field and a standing cornfield. And this big timber, I thought, okay, there's probably some oaks in there, and then I've got the standing beans and the standing corn. And from what I've been seeing right now, the deer are either hitting the mast, acorns, or they're hitting the beans really hard everywhere I've been seeing them. Yeah. So I thought to myself, okay, this could be a great spot where all this stuff comes together. And what was really nice about it is since I never hunted here, I kind of wanted to hunt just an observation stand, somewhere I could just see a long ways and learn. And I had a west-northwest wind, and there was a house on the edge of this property, and I could hunt where all the stuff kind of intersects was like really close to this house and yard. So I was like, I can sneak through this backyard, and my wind will blow right into their backyard, I'm not going to spook any deer probably, and I can get set up right here and at least be in a spot that hypothetically looks pretty decent, and it's super safe to get into, and I can just watch and learn something tonight. So I sneak in there with my stand. I'm going to do that, and then I just start like second guessing everything. I'm like, well, I am really close to this house, and man, that corner way down there closer to the swamp does look really good, and there's a big oak tree down there. And long story short, I second guessed myself out of my initial gut instinct. I set a stand about 100 yards, maybe 80 yards farther down the line than I originally planned on, and about 20 minutes before last light, a big mature 8-pointer steps out of that standing corn, walks right down the edge past where I was going to hunt, and steps into the timber right where I should have been sitting. And I had to watch all this.
I do that every year, man. Every year I will try to talk myself in or out of a different position. When, you go into the timber after all day, I look at Google Maps and, probably what you did. Okay, here's my access. Here's my wind direction. You get there and you're like, wow, man, that over there looks just as juicy as this place. But I think the big buck's going to step out down there, and exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm. It's painful. And then as you know, it gets worse. While I'm hunting there that night, not only do I see this big buck step out of range where I should have been, but then I get a text message from my trail camera on my main Michigan farm, and Holyfield is standing in front of my tree stand in broad daylight for 20 minutes.
Nice.
So there's that. So then the next day I said, well, screw it. I've gotten 2 daylight, confirmation of daylight activity from Holyfield Tuesday night and Thursday night. So it's like, I got to hunt there Friday. He's a daylight walker. I got to try. And there's only one spot I could hunt with a wind I had. So I snuck in there. I actually had my wife bring the ATV and drive me down this field to get me in here, because I've been trying all these different access routes to get in there, and I still, I'm not seeing him. So I'm like, okay, maybe even though I'm doing all these crazy things, maybe that's still not good enough. So I was like, well, let's try this. Because there'd been all sorts of farm equipment around there, and the couple days beforehand, they'd been picking the beans. So I thought, okay, hopefully he'll just think this is another farmhand or whatever, drop me off, and then she drove off away. And that didn't work either. I didn't see him. Right. So that was that, and that's all the hunting I've done since. I have, like you said, got some good trail camera pictures. I had those daylight pictures of Holyfield, and then 2 nights later, I had that 9-pointer show up. He's a 3-year-old, I think, is my best guess. Yeah. So I kind of don't really want to shoot him. Holyfield's really the one I'm after, but that's that. And then I got some great pictures in Ohio. There's some nice big bucks down there. Blades is a buck that I've been hunting for 3 years. He showed back up. Boss is a big 8-pointer that's here for the 2nd year. And then one of the 8-pointers that we saw this summer, he's been showing up, but everything's dark still. Everything's at night.
Nice.
So that's kind of where things stand. I'm waiting until some daylight activity happens down there, or maybe I'll head down when that cold front hits in about a week or 10 days down there. So
nice. Well, it's getting to that time of year where, things are going to slowly start ramping up. I got guys telling me, that I shared a post today about, the rut this year is supposed to be from the 8th to the 20th. Like, that's going to be the peak rut.
Well, according to Charles Elsheimer.
Right. Exactly. The guy who makes the predictions, right?
The moon theory guy.
The moon theory, yeah. So then we got other guys who have been doing a lot of hunting telling me they feel it's going to be early because they're seeing a lot of deer, a lot of bucks pushing does already. Not necessarily chasing them, but, sniffing, bumping them, exactly what Holyfield did to the doe that you saw. And so, I don't know. Who knows?
We just have a couple seconds here, but we talked about this last year, but we haven't really circled back on it a year later. Do you put much credit into that whole moon theory when it comes to the rut?
No, not really. Okay. This is, I really can't, because if I'm going to justify my decision of time off of work based off the moon theory, and if a hot, let's say that moon theory holds true, but the weather is really, really hot. Like, I think, like me and you have talked about, we're going to try to hunt the cold weather as opposed to, the best moon phase on hot weather. Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I can't fall real in line with it. The rut happens when the rut happens. and that time of year, your best bet is just to be in a tree stand as much as you can.
Very true. Very true. And I agree with you 100%. I think weather, and like you said, we've talked about this a lot. Weather always trumps the moon. I'm still a semi-believer / tester of the theory when it comes to some of these other moon theories. Whether it be the moon overhead, underfoot, or the rising, setting moon, and how that might kind of enhance some of that movement a little bit. I think there might be something to that. I'm still, we're still intrigued by it. But when it comes to the timing of actual breeding, like it seems pretty darn set in stone that at least in the northern half of the country, that's very consistent year in and year out due to photo period. So, yeah, I'm just like you. I'm going to hunt every day I possibly can during the rut. But if I were planning my vacation, if I had the flexibility, I'd try to wait and see what the weather forecast was and try to time it with that. And then if not, if you're looking for something that could sway you a little bit, you could look at that moon stuff and research that. But getting a tree.
I already have the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th scheduled to be off work. Now, those other 5 days that I'm dedicating to taking time off could potentially be before that. So like a Thursday, Friday, or a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And then take off the Monday and Tuesday of the following week. You know what I mean? So I'm not getting, 3 weekends in a row, which would be optimal, but I might be catching that peak breeding a little bit more.
Right. Or that peak rut activity.
Yeah. So, and I've never really, whenever I've taken my time off, it's always been the first 2 weeks in November, when I think as I'm starting to get older, man, I don't know. I think maybe that third week is going to be just as good as opposed to the first week.
Think so, huh?
I don't know.
I've always been a big believer in that first 2 weeks too.
Yeah.
But also, for some guys, there's a lot of states that have their firearm season open up in mid-November.
Oh, yeah.
Like in Michigan, our season opens November 15th. So basically, you need to get it done those first 2 weeks.
Right.
Or it's, kind of chaos after that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know, man. I'm excited about the rut. I'm excited for you to get out and do some hunting, too. I need some good stories.
Yeah, I'm ready to spend some time in a tree. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Well, how about this? Let's take a break now for a quick word from our sponsors at Sitka Gear, and then we're going to give John a call, and he's going to give you, Dan, some advice for how to track that big old buck you're going to shoot here soon.
All right. Well, I'm going to shoot him right through the heart, so it's really not going to – I don't need really his tips at all. But no, just kidding.
I hope that's the case. But
knock on wood.
In the off chance that doesn't work out for you, Dan, we're going to talk to John.
Right.
All right. Well, with that said, we do want to thank our partners at Sitka Gear for their support of this podcast. And today, we're bringing you a quick Sitka story from Wade James, a Sitka whitetail ambassador, professional photographer and videographer, and the editor of our 2015 and 16 Wired to Hunt webisodes. And Wade has had an incredible 2016 season already, and it was capped off just recently with a successful hunt that occurred under some unusual and memorable circumstances. Wade, you just killed an awesome buck in Pennsylvania, but some people are popularly referring to it now as the PP tree buck. Why is that?
That's a funny story. When we were hanging the set for the stand, I knew the area I wanted to get a stand up in, and I took my 4-year-old daughter with me. And while I was up there climbing and hanging the stand, she was messing around on the bottom few steps of the screw-in steps that I had, and she ended up slipping off and hitting herself in the crotchal region and getting scared. So I climbed down to make sure she was okay. And after we were done hanging the set, I kind of asked her, what should we name that tree stand that you picked out? And she said, we should name it the PP tree, Dad. So I just laughed about it, and it kind of stuck. So we kept it with the PP tree.
Now, fast forward a little bit later into this fall, something good happened there. Can you tell me about how everything came together?
Yeah, I knew that this spot needed the right wind, obviously, and I had the first frost of the year coming with the wind that I needed for that stand. So I picked my daughter up that helped me hang the stand. I picked her up from preschool and asked her, what tree should Daddy go in tonight? And she said the PP tree. So I kind of scurried out to my lease, got up in the stand, and I ended up shooting one of my nicest bucks out of that spot. I heard a grunt across the creek. I hit the grunt tube twice, and I heard the deer splash across and hit it 2 more times, 2 soft grunts, and I had 2 does, 2 button bucks, and then this buck come filtering up through 7 yards, right in my shooting lane, stopped it, shot it, and then it ran about 50 yards and died. So just, it's crazy that my 4-year-old picked out the tree that I was going to kill my buck in this year.
You just never know where that great hunting advice might come from. But what I do know is that this was a Sitka story, as Wade was wearing a Sitka Fanatic hoodie and shacket and the Fanatic Light bibs. So if you'd like to learn more about Sitka gear for yourself, you can visit sitkagear.com. And now, back to the show. All right, with us on the line now is John Jeanenney. Welcome to the show, John.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I gotta tell you, when I originally had the idea to talk about this topic of tracking and blood trailing and recovering deer, I asked a handful of people that I really respect, and everybody pointed me to you as the person that I needed to talk to. So both I and Dan, and I think all of our listeners, are excited to hear some of your expertise and your experiences when it comes to recovering deer. And I suppose before we get into all of that, could you just share with us a little bit of your background, how you came to have so much experience when it comes to this type of thing?
Well, it really starts when I wounded a deer myself. And I was very upset about it. Twig hit my shotgun slug, and I spent a whole day looking. There was no blood, and a week later, some other hunters found the deer in a swale 300 yards away. And at this time, I realized that if I had had a good tracking dog, the type that they use in Europe, this wouldn't have happened. And I had learned about tracking dogs in Europe. I was doing some research at the French National Forestry School, and I made a number of German friends there. They were German exchange students, and they introduced me to tracking dogs in Germany and wire-haired dachshunds. Already, I came home from that research year with my first dachshund. And, of course, the problem at that time was that using a dog in any form in deer hunting was illegal. And that was not just my state of New York State, but pretty much over the whole Northeast and Midwest. The South was different. We don't have to get into that now. So I applied to our conservation department for a research permit to see if this would work over here. After a lot of talking, I got that permit and began to take calls for hunters who couldn't find their deer. And my luck was I had an amazingly good dog, and we were very successful. So that's the way it got started. And so the research permit was expanded to other people who were interested in tracking dogs. And then finally, the whole procedure was legalized in 1988. It had started in 1976. So this is a long way off, a long way back. But anyway, for the next 40 years, I'm 81 now, I was tracking with some very smart dogs who taught me a lot, because a dog doesn't, a so-called blood tracking dog doesn't need blood to track. They follow the individual scent of the deer. We can go into that later if it's necessary. And it was possible to see what wounded deer do when they're hit and when they go farther than hunters ordinarily able to track. And I ended up taking over, well, actually exactly 1,108 calls. And my dogs taught me a lot. I really owe it to the dogs. I ended up, with a pretty good idea of how to evaluate a hit. I wrote a book on that, and how to track them when there's no blood to track with. And I wrote a book on that, tracking dogs for finding wounded deer. And I've had a wonderful time with this. I think it's important for ethical and conservation reasons, but tracking with a dog, working in partnership with a dog on a difficult task is an extraordinary experience in itself. It helps you to be a little bit of a dog yourself. And this has been my passion.
Now, like you mentioned a second ago, so you've written a book on how to use dogs to help find deer, and then also what you've learned from your dogs, that you've now applied in another book about just generally how to go about this whole process of finding.
That one was called Dead On.
Yeah, Dead On. So kind of what I wanted to do here was kind of frame our conversation around both of those two topics. Maybe start with some of the things that we can do without a dog, and then eventually we can also talk about what you could do or how to find someone who has a dog, or what to do if you had a dog, or all those different things. So maybe, can we start from the beginning, John? Let's say
Sure.
I'm a hunter and I've just shot a deer let's say I'm bow hunting. I've just shot a deer. What are some of the things that we as a hunter should be thinking about immediately at that point? As soon as that arrow hits the deer, what are some of the things that we should be thinking about to help make sure we can get that proper recovery?
Okay, first I think you should try to get as good a memory of the hit site, where the arrow entered the deer, if that's possible. Then you have to decide what your tactics are going to be for finding that deer. The deer may go 50 yards and collapse, and that's the most likely scenario, and that's great. But if you don't actually see the deer go down, I think it's a good idea to get down fairly quickly and go to the hit site and evaluate it. And depending on what you see, you can decide how to handle the situation. I think too many of the writers in the past have tried to deal with wounded deer all in one category. Oh, you always wait. You wait 8 hours, you do whatever. And I think that this is oversimplifying the thing. You go to the hit site. Of course, it's great if you can recover your arrow, and you smell it. A lot of hunters don't do that. But if you smell that arrow, if it's gone a little bit far back into the paunch, you're going to smell kind of a cow barn smell. If it's going back a little bit farther, it's going to be deer dropping smell. And if that's the case, you've got the gut shot, and you don't want to get started on this right away. I think the ideal point there is to back out and wait, if the coyotes will let you do it, for 8 hours, and then go in and track. And by that time, the deer should be dead or very much weakened. But on the other hand, suppose you see bone fragments. Almost always those are from the legs. Now, in cases like that, the old saying, always wait, is all wrong. Because in a case like this, the deer is going to bleed out through the broken bones. But you've got to push the deer to keep it the blood flowing. If you let the deer bed down and relax, the blood will stop, coagulate much sooner. So you've got to make that evaluation. You look for evidence of a chest shot. That's what you want. But my dogs have taught me that a one-lunger is not always fatal. I've learned by talking to medical people that when a lung collapses, the flow of blood to that lung cuts way down, and the deer or the wounded soldier can survive on the other lung. And then very often that lung actually comes back into function later on. So here, it's kind of tricky. I think the best situation would be wait 2 hours and then push the deer. We can learn a lot from Army medics. When a soldier is wounded, they try to keep him quiet and keep the blood flow down. They don't let him exercise. So, you have to make all these distinctions, and you make those by evaluating the hit site. And, of course, evaluating the type of hair that you've got is a very important part of this. Now, this is complicated. I don't deal with it in my book because in different parts of the United States, the hair color and composition is quite different. It depends on the season, too. But evaluating the hair is very important. And you do all these things, and then you decide what your tactic is going to be for finding that deer. Something new that's come in since I started tracking in the Northeast, the coyotes invaded. And now, if you leave an animal out overnight, where I track, you've got a 30% chance of having it devoured by coyotes. So you've got to balance this into your plan of how to track that deer. It's more complicated than it used to be.
Yeah. So step one, we've checked out the site, we've analyzed the arrow, we've smelled it, we've looked to see if there's hair, maybe we've checked to see the color of the blood, some things like that to try to figure out, okay, where did I hit this deer if I don't know for sure? So you said if it's a gut shot or a punch shot, wait at least 8 hours. What about a liver shot?
Well, usually that goes with a punch shot because the liver lies alongside the stomach. But a liver shot is invariably fatal. A wound to the liver doesn't seem to clot up. It continues oozing. Now, you can read books that say that a liver shot deer will never go more than 400 yards or whatever. Well, I've found them going unpushed over a mile and climbing a hill to bed down and die. But they're going to die. And, I think on these cases, it's better to wait and let that loss of blood, that oozing loss of blood, become fatal. If you push it, the deer's still going to die. But if you push it and it stops bleeding, you're in trouble.
Yeah. So that's one of the situations then, along with gut shots, that you recommend not pushing it. But it sounds like
usually a gut shot and a liver shot are combined.
Okay.
Because the liver lies right alongside the main paunch, main stomach.
Yeah. But then for a chest shot, so lungs, heart, you're saying get right after them, which, like you said, is a little bit different than what we hear from a lot of people. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think it is. I think you have to move. When you begin tracking, you track with great caution. And it's nice to have a hunting buddy. One person eye tracks, and the other keeps his eyes out ahead to see if you can get another shot. But a deer is more likely to weaken if he's shot in the lungs than if he's pushed. Now, there are always other things that come into this. You got property lines and so forth. And I don't want to confuse people here. I'm just saying you got to think out every individual situation, not just go with the old boys' advice, wait until morning.
What about body shots? Like if I just get a brisket shot in front of the shoulder or a hit in the back leg. I mean, one of these worst case scenarios where it's a shot that you typically don't think would be fatal. Do you push right after that with the hope of maybe I can keep this deer bleeding? Or what do you do in that?
Yeah, with these body shots, there are times when you can get the deer. There's a big femoral artery that goes down along behind the bone in the hind quarter. If you nick that, you're going to get that deer. But it's impossible to tell immediately whether you're just in flesh or you're in that major artery. Same thing with neck shots. I don't like them at all. But if you nick the jugular vein or the carotid artery, that deer is going to die. So you always try. I would never advocate saying, well, there's no point in tracking this deer, because there is so many unknowns and uncertainties when you evaluate a hit site.
Yeah.
How do you know when to do that? I mean, I'll give a couple examples. And one was a couple years ago. I shot a doe, and my immediate reaction was dead deer. This doe is toast. Tons of good blood for 100 yards. And I waited probably 30 minutes because I felt that, this doe is going to die. And that 100 yards, right towards the end of it, it started it shut off. And then I went maybe 50, 60 more yards, and I found just a little drop. And then that was it. I had gone 200 yards. Then I started gritting. What's something that I may have done wrong? Or if you were by my side, what would you have told me to do?
No, I think this is a pretty good tactic that you did. You probably had, just a flesh wound that would bleed heavily and then clot up. But the next step, when you run out of blood, if you can call a tracker with a trained leash tracking dog, he's going to be able to take that deer a lot farther. And, you may have a pretty good idea of where in the muscle you hit the deer. For instance, on a high neck shot or a high shoulder shot, we never get those. But, the tracker can help the hunter evaluate the situation if the hunter gives him the detail.
Okay.
But I think what you did was fine. If there had been a tracker available and you figured you had a pretty good hit, you could go farther. But a deer will bleed very heavily from a flesh wound, but seldom enough to kill them.
What about that kind of the no man's land shot that some people talk about? This area that's debated, just underneath the spine. Some people say that if you hit underneath the spine, there's this area where there's not a lethal hit. It gets above the lungs and all that. What have you seen from that type of situation? Are those deer recoverable, or is that not going to die?
They're very tough. Those shots are very tough to evaluate. Generally, if the arrow enters the deer less than 6 inches from the top line as you see it, which includes hair, the chances are poor. But there are exceptions to everything. There's a big artery, the dorsal aorta, that runs along right under the spine. And if you clip that deer is going to be down in 100 yards. And there's no way that you can tell. And also with those dorsal aorta shots, there's going to be very little bleeding on the outside. That blood is just going to cascade into the chest cavity.
It's a tough one.
With calls like that, if the arrow is definitely down, 6 inches or more, we take the call. But we know that the chances of getting the deer are not great. Generally, we found that if you track a deer a half mile and on a chest shot, if it's a chest shot, a high chest shot or whatever, if he goes a half mile, he's probably going to survive because he's got a wound that's going to coagulate and clot up, the blood will stop. But there's no way of knowing. One of the great uses of a tracking dog is to determine whether the deer is mortally wounded or not. They make a big thing of this in Europe. They call it a control search. But but there's no way that you can be sure at the hit site of what you got. And I've tracked a lot of these deer, and the hunter is really grateful when I can show him that the deer is going to be okay. He just doesn't want that deer to rot in the woods, and I sure respect that.
Yeah. What were you going to say, Dan?
Well, I was going to kind of go a little bit of a different direction. I mean, after these deer, and maybe by all these track jobs that you've been on, whether the hunter has a dog or doesn't have a dog, do deer tend to do the same thing every time after they're wounded? You hear people talk about water. You hear people talk about going downhill, or they'll never jump a fence, or things like that. Are there any trends that you've noticed that you can share with us that
I'm
might
glad
help?
you asked that question.
Yeah.
No, I don't think that there are trends. When a deer is wounded, he goes back. He tries to get back to a place that's safe and secure, his bedding area. Now, during the rut, a buck may be quite a ways away from that, but they'll go for that, and they'll go uphill or downhill. They go where they want to go. A lot of times I've come in and the hunter said, "We've looked everywhere. We can't find this deer. We've grid searched the whole thing. What about that ridge over there?" Well, wounded deer won't climb a steep slope. Yeah, but the dogs say he did climb it, and there's the deer at the top dead. So, the deer does what is secure safety place for him. And the only generalization I think that holds pretty true is if a deer is shot in the intestines or the stomach, gut shot, they will get thirsty. They'll dehydrate after a while. And if there's water available, they'll go to that. And they wait out in it. A lot of times we find them dead in the water. That's kind of predictable. But other things, no. I'm just amazed at what deer will do. Does usually won't go as far. They're closer to their bedding area than a buck during the rut. But, if you get caught up in these generalizations, a deer is going to always go downhill. And I've read this in a lot of books. They will go downhill if that's where they want to go. But a deer goes where he wants to go until he runs out of gas, runs out of blood. And that could be in various places.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear that, because I think so many of us have been almost trained to just assume some of these generalizations are true. I think it's been ingrained in so many of us over time. But it's interesting. I mean, I think your sample size that you've been able to look at, well over 1,000, animals you've tracked. I think it's pretty clear that if you're not seeing that as a consistent trend, well, it's going to be a lot bigger than any of our sample sizes that we can personally look at.
You got to keep your mind open.
Yeah, for sure. I've got a question that's popped up that kind of goes back to something we talked about a little while ago when we were talking about determining how long to wait. And I know you said to wait, a pretty decent amount of time, 8 hours or more for a paunch, a liver, intestine, et cetera, et cetera. But how does rain factor into that determination? Are you going to change things up if there's rain in the forecast or rain happening right now?
That's a good question. Rain will dilute the blood so that there's nothing that the hunter can see. But the scent is still there. And dogs also, they track other scents that come from the deer, particularly the interdigital scent. There's an interdigital gland between the cloves of the hoof, kind of high on that slot there. And that is an individual scent, and a dog, when he's trained, will follow that very well. So rain doesn't bother an experienced tracker at all, unless, if it's 3-4 inches, okay, that's one thing. But, the normal thing, a half inch, 1 inch, no, the dog can track just the same. Matter of fact, that's better than dry, windy conditions. Early in bow season, it allows dry leaves blowing around on the ground, and the humidity is low. That's a lot tougher than the situation after most rainfalls.
So what if you don't have access to a dog? Would you say that I mean, this is the thing I always deal with myself is do I head right in because I want to try to take advantage of whatever small amount of blood is available, or do you wait a longer period of time because your hope is that I'm not going to have a blood trail of any sort, but hopefully he dies or she dies close enough that when I do kind of a body search, I'll be able to find it. Sounds like a dog is the best case or the best option, but what if I can't get a hold of a dog? What would you do then?
Well, then, when you get to the point beyond fairly easy tracking, it's quit and wait. Because what you don't want to do in a situation like this is jump the deer out of his bed, when he's still alive and he takes off without blood. That deer is gone. Now, if you got a tracking dog, that's not a problem because you can follow that deer out of his bed. But generally, wait. I'm not against grid searches within in reason. Usually, this disrupts scent, but not to an extreme degree. And there you got a chance of finding a deer like that. It depends if you're hunting in brushy fields. You got to work pretty closely, make a pretty close grid. If you're out in open hardwoods, roam around and look in the general area. You can spot a deer down, spot his white belly, 100 yards away.
Yeah.
But I think in cases that don't involve broken legs, you're better off waiting once you're sure that the deer hasn't gone down, in the area that there was easy tracking. With leg hits, the blood comes out through the marrow bone. And if you keep pressure on the deer, he will bleed so that you can eye track him and find him. I've tracked deer like this 4 miles. No, that's unusual.
Wow.
But you can usually spot a leg hit deer by bone fragments and also by, smears on logs and so forth where the deer has dragged his leg across the log.
Yeah, interesting. So you mentioned this question or you mentioned grid searching, and Dan mentioned it too. And this is another one of the things I've thought about because I've got a friend who has a tracking dog that I've thought about, and I usually will take her along on track jobs, even when I know it's going to be an easy job, just because we want to give her experience. But I think one of the questions is, lots of times if someone knows that they can get a hold of a tracking dog or something, there's this question of when do I stop trying to find it myself and get a hold of this person with a dog? Like, at what point am I screwing things up more than I'm helping them by trying to find it myself? Because I know for me at least, I think a lot of us in this situation, we just want to find our deer now. And we just want it to happen. And so there's this allure of, well, let me just try a little further. Let me just look over this hill. Or let me just circle this area. But some guys say, well, you do that, you're screwing up your chances of the dog being able to actually find it in the future. So what do you say to that, John? When is it better for me just to stop and pull out and get a hold of that dog?
Well, I would say if you're blood tracking by eye and the deer has not lain down, there's no evidence that the deer is about ready to drop, back out when eye tracking becomes difficult or impossible. Now that's not the European theory, but in America you try to do things yourself if you can. It depends so much on the circumstances. If you're in an area where you think you could do a fairly effective grid search over maybe a 200 yard area, you might grid search that. But we do find as trackers that when we go into an area that's been grid searched where the deer scent has been tracked up by the hunter, it makes things more difficult. Usually I find I can surmount the difficulties, but that's not the ideal. But as long as you can eye track, there's no need for a dog. This whole business of calling the leash tracking dog a blood tracking dog is a mistake. I use the term myself, but they're useful. They become useful when there's no blood to track.
How does that process usually work? Are there, I mean, I know that tracking dogs and their handlers are kind of becoming much more popular across the country as more and more states legalize it. But I understand there's some different like tracking associations and groups like that across the country that help set up hunters with a dog. Is that something, is that true? Is there some different people or organizations we can get in touch with to find the right people to help?
Yeah, I'm a founder of two organizations, Deer Search Incorporated in New York State, and then United Blood Trackers. We had co-founders. We don't provide people with dogs, but we give them assistance in training, and we also publicize the services that they make available. For instance, in United Blood Trackers, you can go to their website and click on Find a Tracker, and then you'll see the states, 35 states in which tracking is legal. You click on the state, and you can get a listing of the trackers in that state and where they're located, in terms of a town. So that's, they play an important role that way. Deer Search in New York State actually does dispatching too. When a hunter calls in and says, I got a deer I can't find, I've tried everything, they'll put him in touch with a tracking dog in the area where he was hunting. So they play that role, but they don't get involved in providing the dogs, and you buy your dogs kind of on the open market. And then also these organizations promote the idea of tracking in states where it still sounds like a crazy idea. They tell interested leaders, well, this is what our experience has been in New York State or Vermont, and we give them some of the correspondence, the text of the bills that have been passed, so they have an idea of where they're going.
Speaking of bills and laws related to this, what kind of laws are typically around the use of tracking dogs? I think it's not free for all, right? You can't just go out there with a dog and go chase after these deer, right? There are some limitations and restrictions in most states.
Oh yeah. In all but the Deep South and in Texas, number one, the dog has to be kept on a leash from 30 to 50 feet. In some states, you can carry a firearm to put down the deer if it's still alive. In other states, that's not permitted. Most states allow tracking day or night, but some restrict it to the daytime. It's a very complicated thing, There's this set of 35 different regulations. But I think the important thing to realize is that in the Northeast and the Midwest, extending pretty far south, the use of dogs in deer hunting was outlawed for good reasons. It was, it was almost exterminating deer. And now the use of tracking dogs is presented by legislation as an exception. And the most important thing here is the dog is kept at all times on a tracking leash.
Okay. Now, what about if, I thought about this too, what if you wanted to try to get your own tracking dog? Is there any specific type of dog that's best, or specific things you should look for in a dog if you were trying to get train your own?
Oh boy, that is a question. There are specialized breeds that are used for tracking, and you can buy them in Europe or from certain breeders in the United States. For instance, there's the Bavarian Mountain bloodhound from Germany, the Hanoverian bloodhound. What has become very popular is a breed that I started with, the European wire-haired dachshund, which is quite different from the American dachshund. They're registered by AKC, but they're higher in the legs, shorter in the back. I have a wiry coat, and they're much more agile and they have much more endurance. The right kind of lab is very good, not the pet lab or the show lab or the kind of hyper lab that's used in competition, retrieving competitions. But I've seen some marvelous labs. And then a breed from Texas is becoming more and more popular now is the Blue Lacy. So there's quite a number, but and you can't always go by breed labels. I mean, there are duds in all these breed categories, and there are some very good dogs that don't come out of one of these breeds. But usually, your odds of getting a talented dog are better if you stick with a breed that's got the right temperament and the right habits for using its nose. And a lot of it goes into training too. There's an opportunity to buy good prospects in the United States. The demand now is very strong. The demand for tracking dogs is expanding faster than the supply, but I think this is going to settle out. The wire-haired dachshund breed he's handy because he's a small dog that you can easily to transport. He's a good small companion in the house, and he can be very, very talented. But he's certainly not the only breed that can do this. I would say a wire-haired dachshund does not have a bloodhound caliber nose. By the way, there are some American bloodhounds working too, but that's a lot of dog. But usually even a dachshund is going to be able to track wounded deer with no visible blood anyway for up to 24 hours. And in most of our hunting in the Northeast and the Midwest, this is long enough. Now you get trophy hunters that, they want that rack. I shot the deer last week, but I don't care about the meat. I just want that gorgeous set of antlers. There you want American bloodhound or the Bavarian mountain bloodhound or the Hanoverian bloodhound. There's no one perfect breed. I think you've got to find what suits you best.
So what about, the old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks? Is that true? Is this the kind of situation where you need to get a puppy to train him or her to do this kind of thing? Or can I take maybe I've had a lab my whole life and he's 6 or 7 years old and I want to train him to do this now. Is that possible?
Sure. I think it depends on whether the lab has been hunted, has learned to use his nose and, to relate to his handler. I've had the best dog I ever had was Clary, and she didn't start until she was 4. But, I'd hunted other things with her, raccoons, pheasants, and so forth. But to just take a dog that's been a house dog and ask them at 5 or 6 to track, to learn to stay on the right line, all that, that's reaching out pretty far. I think when you get into 8 or 9 years old, by the time the dog has learned from practical experience, as well as training what to do, the dog is going to begin to fail because of age. So, I think the ideal thing for most people is to get a good puppy from a breeder who is into blood tracking and has good blood tracking dog. But you can develop other dogs to do this. With the pointing breeds, some of them are marvelous. I've seen marvelous German wire-haired dachshunds and German wire-haired pointers, the German version of this, which is the Drahthaar. But so many of them, since they've been bred primarily for bird hunting, they'll be high-headed and birdie. Great for wind scenting, but they won't get their nose down to work all cold lines. Some do. And I've seen this, dogs that were great bird finders, wind scenting 50, 60 yards, and could work a cold 24-hour line at the same time. But that's not always the case.
What do you think about all this, Dan?
As far as dogs are concerned, my question is going back to the actual tracking itself, and I hate to go off topic here, but you mentioned something about bumping a deer. You don't. Sometimes it's going to be hard. You really don't. You can't tell if a deer is dead or not unless you're looking at it. So, if somebody does bump a deer, is there? I mean, is it a lost cause that deer's gone forever, or is there still a chance that you can recover it from where you bumped it?
Yeah. Usually, if you get really close to the bedded wounded deer before he jumps up and takes off, he is not going to go very far before he beds again. And, you may be able to get it. I found usually if you get close to a deer, you jump him once, he goes out 200 yards, he beds again, and then the second time you jump him, he goes 100 yards, and then he's finished. That's a scenario, and it depends on the cover that you're working in, how much blood the deer leaves going out of the bed, and how far ahead you can see him go. But when a deer takes off, really when he's not even in sight, and you just find his bed with a little bit of blood in it, that's not a very good opportunity to catch up to that deer without a tracking dog.
So in that case, when you do bump that deer, going back to the wait or don't wait, regardless of how long you waited in the front end, now you've bumped a deer. I think most of us usually, when we bump a deer, we think, oh, shoot, we just bumped that deer, we better wait. And then we go home or we go back to the truck and wait a couple hours and then try again. I feel like that's the most common response. But in that situation, you bump the deer, are you going to keep pushing it usually, or how do you think about that circumstance?
Well, by the time you've gotten to the point where you've bumped the deer, you probably know how it's wounded. And if it's wounded in the guts, or it's given evidence of being very weak, follow it up. Otherwise, back off. You've always got to think of this problem of the coyotes. It's never simple. It'd be nice if you could write a little manual for hunters and 5 pages of how to find a wounded deer. But damn it, I've learned, my dogs have taught me that it's a lot more complicated than that.
Yeah, I wish it was that easy, that it could be summed up.
That's what I try to deal with in my book, Dead On. That's written for hunters who don't have access to a dog. What can they do to handle and track a deer hit in different places?
So is there anything we haven't touched on that specific topic, the if I don't have a dog? Is there any other big lessons that you've learned that we haven't covered?
Well, we just talked about bow hunting. Is that your...
oh, that's a great point.
The focus, or do you want to expand it to gun hunting?
No, we definitely do want to talk about the firearm side too. How does that change things?
Okay. Well, I think there's one important thing that we haven't mentioned, and I see this is a hunter mistake that's made time and time again when we get calls on it. On a high back shot with a shotgun slug or a rifle bullet, if the deer goes down immediately and stays down, well, you're going to get that deer. But quite often, that bullet it's hit one of the prongs, spinous processes coming up off the vertebrae, or there's been a shock to the spinal cord within the backbone. The deer goes down, and if it gets up again and takes off, it's gone. We can't catch up with them with a tracking dog. And so many times, hunters, they're so sure that deer was fatally wounded because it went down instantly. Well, if it stays down, that's the case. But if it gets up again, it's gone. And, I've had hunters say, well, I hit him good out at 200 yards, and he went right down. I knew I had him, so I went up to the house to get my ATV and have a cup of coffee. And then when I went down there, he wasn't there anymore. Come find him. And, I've learned not to take those calls because it just it doesn't work. If the deer shows any signs of getting ready to get up again, you put another shot in him. I think that's the most common error I see gun hunters make.
All right, now before we move on to my next question for John, we need to pause briefly for a word from the sponsors of this episode of the podcast, Carbon Express Arrows. And when it comes to hunting arrows, I think one of the greatest challenges that the average bow hunter has is trying to wade through all the different options available and figure out exactly what kind of arrow and setup is best for his or her hunting application. So with us today is Carbon Express's Alex Tate to help us understand exactly how to pick the right arrow for your situation.
So the two main groups of hunters, and if you don't agree with this, then let me know, but in our heads here, is going to be whitetail specifically. That's number one in anywhere. And then two is going to be out west elk hunting or out west mule deer hunting, and that's all kind of the same. A little bit bigger size animals, a little bit longer yardages, a lot less woods. So the differences between those two and the difference between your arrow selection, for a whitetail hunt, I would always recommend a heavy arrow, specifically because in most whitetail situations and habitats, you're going to get a 30-yard shot or less. So speed really does not matter. On top of that, today's bows are so efficient that you really want weight these days, in my opinion and in a lot of people's opinions, especially at this company. So that would be where I'd push people for whitetails. So like our reds, our mayhem, stuff like that. It's very, very heavy pile drivers. For the people who aren't ever going to see over a 30-yard shot, a pile driver is just a phenomenal arrow because it's extremely heavy and you don't need anything else. You're shooting 30 yards max and you're wanting to punch through that animal as fast and efficiently as possible. But when you go out west, you're dealing with 70-yard shots. You're dealing with no trees, and with no trees comes a lot of wind. So you have to start factoring in that as well, and with that becomes you're going to be looking for like a smaller diameter. So like our pile driver pass-through extreme is a great option, 203 inner diameter, extremely heavy, so it helps cut through that wind. A light arrow that is small diameter will only do so much for you because it's still light. It's going to drift. So those would be my two main differences between those. And then also going out west on those longer shots, the more FOC you can get, the better. So a weight forward arrow or a triple spined arrow with 125 grains up front can really pay dividends when you start getting past 40, 50 yards.
So there you go. And if you'd like to learn more about any of the arrows that Alex mentioned, you can visit carbonexpressarrows.com. And now, back to the show. Are there any other differences from the other tracking kind of best practices we talked about, or the times to wait, that we talked about when it came to bow hunting? Is there any other differences when it comes to using a firearm? Do you wait less or longer after a gunshot at all?
I don't think there are any clear differences. The wound that's made is different. An arrow cuts in a specific area, and if it hits a vein or whatever, the results are going to occur right away. With a rifle bullet, you have shock around the passage of the bullet. You have tissue damage around the passage of the bullet, and you're dealing with a damage zone that's actually broader than when you shoot with a broadhead. Another thing I'll throw in here, you may want to edit this out, is we get a lot of calls from people that are using mechanical broadheads. And I know when a mechanical broadhead works, it's awesome. But there are so many cases where they give inadequate penetration. Maybe they hit a rib. I think a lot of times hunters will be shooting with a mechanical, I won't mention brand names, but they're tempted to use a light arrow and a light poundage bow. And, they get, when they're shooting targets, they get beautiful flat trajectories, but they don't have enough energy in that arrow when it strikes the deer to get all the way through. Sometimes you don't get any exit wound, but you still got a killing wound. But a lot of times, it's 4 inches penetration. Almost anybody that tracks a lot says, I would never use a mechanical. But, the general hunting public doesn't see it the same way. We just see all the cases where the mechanical doesn't work.
No, that's good to know.
When you say doesn't work, I'm a kind of a gear nut. What do you mean by doesn't work? You mean it's not opening like it's supposed to open, or the broadhead itself is damaged and it's not living up to its potential?
It loses its energy, its kinetic energy.
Right.
There's more resistance when those blades open, particularly if they hit a rib or something like that. And so you don't get the penetration. Then when the arrow stops, the blades float. They don't keep on cutting as they would in a standard broadhead where, with the muscle movement of the animal, it would continue cutting back and forth. So I think this is it, inadequate penetration. I don't see too many cases where they don't open, but I think if you're going to use a mechanical, you want to use a high poundage bow and heavier arrows, not what you would use in a tournament. That brings up another thing, too. I think the 3D tournaments show the lethal kill zone, the deer target, in a much too optimistic way. They make it look like if you hit the deer 4 inches below the top line, that's going to kill them good. And the real kill zone for a deer, heart and lungs, is going to be lower than anything you see with the current 3D tournament targets. I think that, I'm all for cultivating the art of shooting accurately, but I think in this respect, the competition leads to an unrealistic viewpoint of what the kill zone is in a real live deer.
That's good to know. So it sounds like it's better to err a little bit low than a little bit high, typically.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And this is especially true with black bear. Now, this year in the Northeast, we've got a heavy black bear kill. And most of the time, the hunters, they'll shoot for the middle of the chest, and they're a little bit high, and they're just going through muscle. They're not getting into the very low heart-lung area of a black bear.
Interesting. I don't know, Dan. Do you have any other questions on this topic?
No, not really. I think he's provided us with a lot of information today.
Yeah, this has been interesting, especially some of the insights, that go counter to some of the generally held knowledge that's kind of anecdotally been passed down for decades.
Yep.
That's particularly interesting. I think, big take-home message for me is to not be afraid to go after these deer that we know for sure have been hit well. I think that makes sense to go after them, but then also to kind of not be afraid to hold off when it's a little bit questionable in the right situations. Do you have any final thoughts you'd want to leave, or any other big mistakes, John, that you think that most people are making in the situation that we still need to cover?
Well, I think that a lot of hunters still haven't adjusted to this new age of the coyotes. And what was good advice for Grandpa is not good advice anymore. So that's one thing. I think for the whole wounded deer question, you can't make just a big generalization about the whole thing. You got to break it down into the various situations depending on the anatomy of the deer. And it pays to look at a diagram of deer anatomy so that you can recognize situations when they arise.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess speaking of that then, what resources would you recommend to better understand this type of scenario? And I'd love to hear about your books or any other places people can go online to learn more about your resources or anything else you recommend.
Well, I think my book for hunters that aren't working with dogs, Dead On, is probably the most up-to-date, because the other writers have not had this experience of working with dogs that tell us what deer actually do. So that book, Dead On, which we sell off our website, borntotrack.com, is, I think, useful. There's a lot of detail. It's a shorter book, I think it's 90 pages, but I want to see this knowledge that the dogs have given us more widespread, and I'm sure other people are going to pick it up and develop it. But right now, I don't think that there's enough that's been published, or videos that have been published. There's a lot to be done here, and it'll be other people who do it. I'm 81, so my tracking days in the woods ended when I was 80. But I want other people to pick this up and write more. And what you're doing on this program here of publicizing this new knowledge, I think, is tremendously valuable.
Well, hey, we appreciate you sharing that expertise and experience, John. And that website, I believe you said, was borntotrack.com. Is that correct?
Yeah, with there are hyphens between born and born hyphen TO hyphen TRACK.com, and you see that. You can see reviews about it. The tracking dog book has sold actually more than Dead On, but I think that Dead On has a lot of potential for people who don't want to get involved in tracking dogs, and that's not for everybody. Tracking dogs are good for the person who's got the right time and temperament for doing it, but that's not going to appeal to everybody.
Yeah.
And there's no point in having a tracking dog if he's not well trained and experienced. You just can't take your TV watching pooch off a couch and think you're going to do very much with him.
Yeah, I wish it was that easy. Well, John, we'll make sure to link to that website, so if anybody is interested in reading either one of those books or checking out anything else about what John has been doing, we'll make sure to have a link to that.
And my number is in there, and I like to talk to people about questions they may have or give them more advice.
Excellent.
I spend my other life as a teacher, so that's communicating information is something I really like to do.
Well, I definitely think you've done that today, John. You've helped a lot of people out, us included, so thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Okay, well, I certainly enjoyed it too. Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course. And there you have it. A few quick updates before we go, though. As always, a big thank you to our partners who help make this podcast possible. So thanks to Sitka Gear, Redneck Blinds, Huntera Maps, Yeti Coolers, Ozonics, Carbon Express, Maven Optics, and the Whitetail Institute of North America. And thank you to all of you who have gone out and supported these companies or thanked them for their work with Wired to Hunt. I'm getting more and more messages about this kind of thing happening, and it's really an unbelievable help for this podcast and for the Wired to Hunt website. When our partners hear about the impact that this show and Wired to Hunt is having, it's a huge eye-opener for them. And that kind of thing is what it's going to take to keep this show going. So just huge thanks for that. Also, thank you, of course, for tuning in today, for hearing us out talking about our own hunts, and for joining us to hear what John had to share as well. I hope you learned a thing or two that's going to help you on your next track job. And of course, I hope you also get an opportunity to enjoy a track job soon. So until next time, I hope you'll stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.